I don't really know how to thank everybody affiliated with the American Film Institute in a way.
The world of cinema has yet to recover from the news that Diane Keaton, the woman who turned difference into an icon, has passed away forever. But amid the flowers, the lights, and the millions of words of mourning, Dexter, the daughter Diane once cherished and loved as if she were her own flesh and blood, has spoken out for the first time, her voice trembling with anger and grief, revealing hidden corners of her mother's life never before known. "My mother was a woman who loved deeply," Dexter began. "But she was also someone who lived with a regret that never faded. It turns out her heart had endured more cracks than the world ever imagined." Diane Keaton, for all her radiance, her laughter, her courage, carried within her a sadness that even the brightest spotlight could not erase. Dexter shared that throughout her life, her mother longed for love, but chose solitude. She was always supportive of her children, always smiling brightly in public, the very image of grace and humor. But in the quiet of her room, there was often only a woman gazing back into the past, where old letters, yellowed photographs, and unfinished love still lingered. She made a devastating accusation toward Hollywood, revealing that in her mother's final years, when illness tormented her, not a single person ever came to visit. "The whole world abandoned my mother," Dexter said softly, as if she had already died. Diane Keaton adopted her first child, Dexter Dean, in 1996 when she was already 50 and at the peak of her career. It was a decision that shocked Hollywood, as Keaton was famously independent, had never married, and often joked, "The longest relationship I've ever had is with my work." But after years of living amid glamour and complex roles, she realized that what was missing from her life wasn't romantic love, but the chance to love and care for someone wholeheartedly. When she brought Dexter home, Keaton once said in an interview, "I don't need to give birth to her to be her mother. I just need to love her." 4 years later, in 2001, Keaton expanded her family by adopting a baby boy, Duke. She called it "the second gift of my life." At that time, Keaton was focusing on more mature roles, and having 2 small children at home forced her to completely change her lifestyle. Early mornings, bedtime stories, school drop-offs, these were brand new experiences for the woman who once said, "Being alone is enough to make me happy." But Keaton quickly realized that the joy of motherhood far exceeded any cinematic achievement she had ever known. Close friends of Keaton said she was a devoted, meticulous mother who fiercely protected her children's privacy. Despite being a world-class star, she never let the cameras touch the lives of Dexter and Duke. She wanted them to grow up normally, to have their own childhood, unburdened by their mother's fame. She taught them that peace was more important than glory, that being kind was worth more than being famous. For years, Diane Keaton shielded her 2 children from the glare of the public eye, giving Dexter and Duke a peaceful childhood. Far from the chaos of Hollywood, she never allowed their lives to be scrutinized because she believed love didn't need to be proven in front of a camera. However, when Keaton passed away on October 11th, that wall of privacy finally cracked open, and it was Dexter, her now 30-year-old daughter, who spoke out for the first time. In endless grief, she shared stories never before known about her famous mother, a woman gentle, strong, and devoted to motherhood until her very last breath. Dexter grew up surrounded by the love of a mother who rarely spoke about her feelings but expressed them through small, intimate gestures. Keaton never tried to be the perfect mother. Yet it was her authenticity and occasional clumsiness that made both Dexter and Duke feel unconditional love. Every morning, she would make them milk, handpick their clothes for school, and every night, she would ask, "What made you happy today?" It wasn't a grand question, but it showed she wanted them to recognize joy, even in the smallest things. After Keaton's death, Dexter cried for days. She couldn't bring herself to read any of the articles written about her mother. "All those tributes," she said, "were still just outside perspectives. No one but me and my brother knew how gentle she was on nights when she couldn't sleep, or how she silently sat beside us whenever life felt too heavy to speak about." To the world, Diane Keaton was a legend. To Dexter, she was the only safe place, the one who taught her how to be herself, even when the world demanded she be someone else. Many once asked why Keaton chose to be a single mother in her 50s. Dexter recalled, laughing at how her mother answered that question, "I didn't choose the timing. I chose love." And indeed, she loved her children in the simplest way. without conditions, without control. When Dexter decided to step away from the spotlight to live a private life, Keaton didn't object or try to dissuade her. She simply said, "If that's what gives you peace, I'll always be right behind you." However, every legend's life has a darker side, and Dexter discovered her mother's deepest secret in her study, where Diane used to sit for hours with a cup of cold coffee and faint jazz music in the background, among piles of old scripts. She found a leather-bound notebook tied with a silver ribbon. It was worn, frayed at the corners, carrying a faint trace of perfume. She opened it, and her mother's world, a world of hidden pain and unspoken love, began to breathe again. The first page began with a short sentence, "I loved him with everything I had." Beneath it was a single name repeated over and over, Al. Dexter read slowly, feeling as if she were stepping into another life, that of the woman who had taught her that independence was everything. Each of Diane's words trembled with restraint, not from a proud Hollywood icon, but from a woman who knew how to love and feared losing. "He made me feel like a 25-year-old girl forever," her mother wrote, recalling 1971 when they met on the set of The Godfather. Diane was radiant, lively, and Al Pacino, the man with deep, silent eyes, entered her life like a cold wind that would never let her feel warm again. Dexter turned the next pages. Diane wrote about the days they filmed in New York. When she laughed, he looked at her, and the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. "We didn't need to talk much," she wrote. "We just needed to be silent together." In long passages filled with longing, Diane described how Pacino made her laugh in tense moments, how they drove through Los Angeles at night with Sinatra's "Fly Me to the Moon" playing on the radio, her feet on the dashboard, her hair tousled by the wind. "He was the dream I could never wake from," she wrote. But that love grew fragile as fame crept in. Diane wrote of the times he disappeared for weeks without explanation, the calls he wouldn't answer, the nights she waited until morning with an untouched glass of wine. "I was afraid that if I called one more time he would disappear for good, but then he would return, smiling as if he had never left, and she, fragile yet proud, forgave him again. I don't know why I always chose to stay," she wrote. "Maybe because I believed that if I stayed long enough, he would love me the way I loved him." Dexter reached the part about Rome, 1990. Diane wrote, "We lived together in a villa overlooking the city, dining on the balcony, laughing until we cried. I thought destiny had finally softened, but then the writing slowed. The lines tilted. I asked him, marriage or goodbye? He said nothing, and that silence killed me softly, like a knife. That night, standing by the window, watching the city lights flicker, Diane knew everything was over. The next day, she left Rome and never went back, never saw Pacino again." After closing the diary, Dexter remembered moments when her mother would sit in her plaid armchair, holding a cup of cold tea, eyes fixed on the screen playing The Godfather. Even after hundreds of viewings, she would still smile faintly whenever Michael Corleone appeared, a vague, tender, sorrowful smile. "He was my husband on screen," she once said, "and that was enough." Back then, Dexter was too young to understand the faraway look in her mother's eyes. Now she knew it was the gaze of a woman remembering the only man she had ever truly loved. On her mother's desk, amid old scripts and family photos, there was one item Diane always kept, a small yellowed piece of paper framed in glass. As a child, Dexter once asked what it was, and Diane only smiled. "Just a small memory, one no one remembers but me." Later, while sorting through her mother's belongings, Dexter discovered that it was a handwritten note from Al Pacino. "You're the one I loved most. Always will." The handwriting was hurried, slightly slanted, as if written in a fleeting moment. In one corner, a coffee stain, an echo of a love preserved by time. In her mother's wallet, beside a photo of Dexter and Duke as children, was another photograph. Pacino at 30, in a black suit, eyes turned slightly to the right. It wasn't a public photo, not from a film set, but a candid shot from an old party. Dexter once thought about throwing it away, but stopped. She remembered her mother saying once, half-jokingly, "He never looked straight at the camera, but he made the whole world look at him." Perhaps that's why she kept it. Not out of nostalgia, but because it was the only way she could keep the piece of her heart that belonged to someone else. Every year on Pacino's birthday, Diane would disappear for a few hours. She never said where she went, only left a note on the fridge. A day for things long gone. When she returned, she was cheerful again, hugging her 2 children, cooking dinner, singing Moon River in the kitchen. But her eyes, Dexter always noticed, carried a soft sadness, as if she had just come back from a place only she knew. Once, in an interview, someone asked Diane which of all the men in her life she remembered most. She smiled, tilted her head and answered, "Al, always." When the interviewer laughed and asked again, she only shrugged. There are people you don't need to meet again. They stay inside you forever. Dexter finally understood why her mother, admired by millions, chose to live alone and raise her and Duke without a man by her side. Diane had once loved completely and been left behind in silence. Perhaps that's why she spent the rest of her life giving that love to her children, a love without conditions, without demands, without fear. "Mom loved us as if she were mending a crack in her own heart," Dexter said. In her later years, Keaton spent more time at home. She loved gardening, cooking, and looking through old photo albums. Dexter often caught her smiling at photos from her graduation day, or the day Duke first learned to ride a bike. She never forgot to text them every morning. Sometimes just, "Have you had water yet?" Or, "It's a beautiful day. Don't forget to take a walk." Those little things have now become the biggest absences, but those final months were also the saddest. Dexter witnessed the woman who once shone on red carpets, with a smile bright as sunlight. Now frail, her hands trembling as she lifted her cup of tea. "Sweetheart, I'm just a little tired," Diane would say. But Dexter saw the truth in her eyes, a pain carefully hidden, smoldering like a silent flame. Keaton had always been a woman who never complained. She once said her life was a series of beautiful mistakes. But in those final years, her body began to betray her. The aftermath of her long battle with skin cancer left scars and weaknesses that had to be carefully covered each time she went outside. Some mornings, Dexter would see her mother sitting before the mirror, gently touching the area on her cheek that had been operated on, then smiling. Still proud, still luminous. But the body was only part of it. What was more cruel was the invisible illness she had spoken of long ago, bulimia, the eating disorder that haunted her since 25. In her diary, Keaton confessed that there were times she ate to fill the emptiness of a soul afraid of being abandoned. "I loved beauty," she wrote, "but beauty was what destroyed me." Dexter remembered nights when her mother couldn't sleep. Diane would sit by the window, staring into the garden where the yellow light streamed through glass like fragments of memory. Sometimes Dexter would sit beside her in silence. Her mother would smile softly and say she was listening to old roles echoing in her head. In truth, she was counting her sorrows, the roles that drained her, the men she loved but couldn't keep, the pain that fame could never heal. When her illness worsened, Diane refused to leave home. "I want to leave this world in the place where I laughed, loved, and raised my children," she said. Dexter and Duke took turns caring for her, brewing tea, reading aloud, playing old jazz records she adored. Though frail, Diane would hum along softly, her voice trembling yet filled with quiet freedom, as if she was bidding farewell to life with the one thing she loved most: sincerity. In her final days, Dexter found a stack of papers in her mother's bedside drawer titled, "Things I'm Grateful For," "Breakfast with My Children," "Sunsets." The feeling of being loved, even once, is enough for a lifetime. At the bottom of the last page, Diane had written, "I have lived and I have loved. The rest, let the light keep for me." During those last weeks, their Brentwood home grew silent. Diane Keaton, once the woman who made Hollywood bow its head, was left with her doctor, her nurse, and her 2 children. Every day, Dexter watched her mother grow weaker, her memory fading like film burned by too much light. What pained her most wasn't the world's silence, but the absence of one man, Al Pacino, the name that had appeared in every story, the reason her mother smiled whenever she remembered the past. But in those final months, there was no call, no message, no sign that he remembered the woman who had loved him so deeply. "My mother never resented him," Dexter said later, "but I resented his silence for her." And finally, at dawn on October 11th, 2025, the California sun rose gently through her window. On the desk, Her teacup was still warm, her glasses resting on an open journal. She had been writing about love, as she always did. Dexter was the first to notice the stillness. Her mother was resting in her armchair, eyes closed as if lost in thought. Diane was gone. No sound, only a final breath dissolving into eternity. The family released a short statement. Diane Keaton passed away peacefully at her home, surrounded by light, love, and the world she built with her own hands. In the hours that followed, Dexter and Duke sat in the garden she once tended, speaking about her daily rituals, her tea, her long walks, her endless notebooks, filled with thoughts never shared. They decided there would be no grand ceremony, no cameras, only candles, soft music, and words beneath the tree she had planted. That evening, the house glowed from within, golden light flickering through the windows like the warmth that had followed her all her life. News of Diane's passing spread quickly. The Oscar-winning actress and Hollywood icon had died at 79. Her face filled every screen, headlines mourning a soul so gentle and true. Outside her Brentwood home, a small crowd gathered, bringing flowers, candles, and neatly folded white turtlenecks. A handwritten sign read, "You made us brave enough to be ourselves." Hollywood's greatest names wept. Al Pacino released a simple statement, "She was the quiet mirror of my heart." Meryl Streep, Steve Martin, Woody Allen, Bette Midler, Leonardo DiCaprio, all shared memories of her wit, her intelligence, her fearless authenticity. That night, the Academy released a tribute reel. Diane's smile lit up the screen once more, from Annie Hall to Reds, from Marvin's Room to Something's Gotta Give. Every scene, every moment of love and loneliness intertwined, reminding the world that Diane Keaton was not just a star, but a symbol of strength, resilience, and quiet, enduring love. Over the soft hum of piano music, Diane's own voice played, tender yet powerful, "Love is the greatest risk of all." In theaters across the world, strangers wept. It wasn't just grief, it was recognition, as if a generation was saying goodbye to its reflection. Born in 1946 in Los Angeles, Diane grew up in a world where smiles were masks and emotions were buried beneath perfect dinners. Her mother, Dorothy Hall, a former Miss Los Angeles, was radiant but quickly swallowed by the quiet roles of wife and mother. In that home, Diane learned early to read between silences. Watching her mother's dreams fade, she vowed never to share the same fate. In 1966, at 20, she left Los Angeles for New York, escaping conformity and even her family's surname, reclaiming her mother's maiden name, Keaton, as both tribute and rebellion. New York greeted her with cold streets and broken dreams, but it was there, amid hunger and rejection, that Diane Keaton was born. Strong, eccentric, radiant, in painful honesty. In 1972, The Godfather propelled her from obscurity to stardom. As Kay Adams, she embodied light within darkness, but Annie Hall in 1977 immortalized her. The awkward grace, the oversized suits, they weren't costumes, they were her truth. Success, however, came at a cost. Every role left pieces of her behind. "I don't sleep," she once said. "I'm afraid to stop." When fame faded, Diane turned inward, writing, directing, restoring homes, building beauty from silence. She once said, "Applause fades, but the work, that's what saves you." Her fortune, estimated at over $100 million, was built by her hands alone. Her Brentwood estate, worth nearly $30 million, was filled with sunlight, ivy, and the scent of old books. After her death, Dexter and Duke decided to preserve everything exactly as it was, a living legacy of the